Welcome to our channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to embark on an exciting journey to create a 3D mountain climbing game using Java. We'll delve into the world of Java 3D graphics, game mechanics, and user interaction. Before we dive into coding, let's outline what the game will look like. Our mountain climbing game will allow players to navigate a 3D environment, climb up mountains, and face various challenges. We'll implement features such as terrain generation, player controls, and simple game physics. First, let's set up our development environment. Make sure you have Java installed, along with an IDE of your choice. I recommend using IntelliJ IDEA or Eclipse for this project. Once your development environment is set up, we'll need to add the Java 3D library to our project. You can download the Java 3D library and add it to your project's build path. This library will help us create 3D graphics necessary for our game. Now let's jump into coding. We'll begin by creating the main class for our game. This class will initialize the game window and set up our 3D canvas. In this code, we import necessary libraries, create a JFrame, initialize a simple universe, and add a basic 3D object, a sphere. This serves as our preliminary visual, and we'll soon replace it with our mountain terrain. Next, let's create a more complex terrain for our mountain. We can utilize a height map to generate a realistic mountain landscape. For this, we'll create a separate class called Terrain that generates the height data. In the Terrain class, we load a height map from an image. The load height map method reads pixel values to generate our terrain's height. Note that you'll need to include your height map image in the resource folder of your project. Now that the terrain is loaded, we need to implement the method that creates the 3D geometry in the createTerrain method. We'll create a flat grid and adjust the heights based on our height map. In the createTerrain method, we've populated an array of points and defined triangles connecting them. We also set the appearance of the terrain. Don't forget to add this terrain to your 3D universe in your main frame. With the terrain ready, let's create our player character. We'll create a character class called Player that will handle the user's input and movement within the terrain environment. The player will be represented by a simple 3D shape. In the player class, we define the player's 3D model and create a transform group to manage its position. The move method will be responsible for translating the player's position based on user input. Next, we'll implement keyboard controls to move the player within the 3D space. We can achieve this by adding a key listener to capture user input. With this key listener implementation, pressing W, I, S, or D will move our player in the corresponding direction on the terrain. Make sure to register this listener with the game window. Now that we have basic movement, let's add a camera to give the player a better view of their surroundings. We'll position the camera to follow the player as they climb the mountain. In the setup camera method, we position the camera at a height so that it follows the player's movements. We also link this camera to our universe so that the view updates as the player moves. Continuing with our game, we can introduce some basic physics to simulate gravity. This will add realism to our mountain climbing mechanics, as players will slide down slopes under certain conditions. Here, we define and apply gravity method that decreases the player's velocity when they are falling. We'll check for collisions with the terrain to handle when the player lands. To complete our game, we should consider adding some obstacles or collectibles on the mountain. We could introduce items that give players boosts or supplies needed for climbing. The collectible class represents an item that players can collect. We match its position with a vector 3F, which will be part of the games and the terrain generation process. Great! We have the fundamentals in place. It's time to put everything together in our mountain climbing game class and create an instance of the terrain, player, and collectibles. Finally, we need to handle the game loop. This loop will keep updating player positions and refreshing the display. You'll typically use a timer or thread to achieve this. This simple game loop continuously updates the game state every 20 milliseconds. This way, our game remains responsive to player input and simulates real-time physics. And just like that, we have created a basic structure for our 3D mountain climbing game. Your next steps can include elaborating on physics, adding an engaging UI, and refining the graphics further. Thank you for joining me in building this 3D mountain climbing game in Java. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what features you would like to see added. Happy coding!